spending the time this afternoon with us here at the audit committee meeting. We are calling to order, and our first item is the approval of the agenda. While we wait for Councilmember Barber, we're going to bring the annual report first. The next item is the can I get a motion to approve the modified agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The next item is the approval of the October 29th audit committee meeting. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, so first up is the annual report.
So I'm going to start this off. Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Oh, who's that?
Just I'll keep going with this agenda item. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today and just kind of recognize it's been a very busy year, a very active year for our team and our committee, and a good year. So we're going to talk a little bit about our annual report and some of the outcomes, something we've done every year at this meeting. It's good, actually this order is kind of good because I think it kind of rounds out last year before we start talking about next year. And I'm just going to go through a couple things from my normal director's report, and then I'm going to hand it over to Tim to talk about the annual report. And the first thing I want to talk about is the audit committee. So first on my list is we have committee member Vento. This will be her last audit committee meeting as she is retiring from the council as a council member in February. I'm getting that right. Okay. So as is tradition in our committee, we have a little gift we give to departing members. So this is a magnifying glass.
Oh, perfect.
Your work on the committee.
Oh, this is wonderful.
And
Oh, this will take care of all sorts of issues. Thank you very much.
It's helpful too. So
Yeah,
I actually have one of those on my Christmas list.
I just wanted to
I said I actually put one of those on my Christmas list.
You did?
Oh, we'd like to
Yeah.
help you out upstairs.
I just want to say from the chief audit executive perspective, you've been a wonderful committee member, you asked good questions, we talked about that privately, but just, you know, both in these meetings and just one-on-one as well with me and the team. So I really appreciate the last, I think, 6 years you've been with us. So thank you very much, and I wish you a good one in your time.
Well, and I'm gonna have a herd of great nieces and nephews fighting over this, so this will be fun. Thank you.
So then the second point is just a reminder for the committee. So we have, we started staggering our community members' terms 2 years ago now. So we have kind of have 2 new fresh members every couple of years. Not that we can also continue with members that are in existence, but we'll have 2 positions open. It's Jorgensen and Galswick positions. So we'll be working on posting that as using the same process we've used in past years to acquire new members or continuation of members for 2025 and 2026. And then we'll also have the vacancy to fill, and that's the responsibility of the chair of the council to do. So looking forward to refresh committee in the new year, and looking forward to a lot of good work in this committee going forward. One more thing from me, just a department staffing update. We've had 2 of our associate auditors move up to the position of auditor. Amy Gillespie and Sydney Foster recognize their really good work with outstanding members of our team, and we were able to make that happen since the last meeting. So just want to recognize those 2. The last thing I want to talk about, and you're going to forgive me because we've talked about our peer review. The last meeting we had our peer review panel from APTA here. I got this morning, and I have seen it very, very briefly. But I wanted to highlight that we got it. We've received the results. I'm just going to go through it very quickly and sort of search around through here to say that we got there are 3 categories you can possibly get on the peer review. One is does not conform, one is partially conforms, one is generally conforms. Generally conforms being the ideal. we did get a generally conforms for our department for 2024 as we did in 2019. We did get some feedback in terms of areas that we could improve upon. None of this was a surprise. I think even early on in the meetings, we talked about some areas. What I'll highlight is we are supposed to bring the charters for approval every year, and we've only done that once. We're going to start doing that every year. And I think per some feedback we've gotten, also bring some information items to the full council at least once a year. So some feedback there, and then internally, I think we're supposed to have something called a quality assurance improvement plan, more formally than we do. I think we do a lot of things that would be considered in a QAIP, we just never wrote it down and had like the formal process, so that's something we'll work on. We'll look through this, we'll develop management responses, we'll come back in March with a full report out on the peer review and our plans to improve. Just really want to thank the group that came to work with us. It was really a good experience, I think, for me, the whole team. And I guess the last thing this is kind of the tooth and horn of the whole team. We had some questions both from our staff and from senior leaders, and there's a list in here who all was surveyed. And we had 85% positivity in the response rate. So that meant like on the Likert scale it was a 4 or 5, 85% of the time. And that held both through senior leadership and council members and within our own team. So a very positive sign that we had good feedback from those that were surveyed, so thanks to those who were surveyed. So more to come on this, but just to let you know that an update that it is here and we're going to start to evaluate how to process that in the coming days. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and he's going to walk through the annual report.
Mr. Chair, Matt, can I?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So congrats, it'll be fun to take a look at that, and we'll miss you very much. Congratulations on your retirement, it was great to get to know you here.
Well, Mr. Chair, I have to confess, this is my third attempt to retire.
Oh.
So, I'm gonna set a record doing this.
Okay.
If you come back, you have to be with me.
Okay, I actually, my younger brother and his wife became grandparents for the first time in October, and they're trying to recruit me to be a nanny for their grandson, and I said, you want this child to turn out well, so let's not go there.
Chair, give me a moment, I get ahead a little bit.
We reversed the order of these, so
Yeah.
there you go.
So Chair, committee members will just briefly go over kind of the accomplishments and where we're at for the department. Starting with the number of audits that we've completed. So all the ones that you've seen, and you'll hear some of them today for MCOB, North Star, and ES Incident Management. The two that are near completion are risk management and the comments and complaints. Wrapping up testing on those, hopefully we should present those probably in the next audit committee. The other thing we want to note is we did have an increase in the number of audit projects completed throughout the year. So we had 40 that were completed, that's audit work, in addition to, I believe, investigations and some other advisory activities. That's up from 31 last year. So as Matt said earlier, pretty busy year. So overview of how we spend our time. Most of it's obviously in audits. The administration portion, we are still continuing to improve this and how projects or activities get coded. Not always the best, but again, ongoing process. A couple other things to identify, so you can kind of see a little blip in September and October for our annual risk assessments. But again, lots of work being done in the audit report. As far as external audits, most of these are pretty standard compliance audits with MNPCA, MNOSO, the OSA. The legislative auditor, we're still waiting on the one for Southwest. We did get the one report for Metro Mobility. But the one that we're anticipating and everybody's so excited for is the FTA triennial, which is coming up. We're anticipating that they're going to make the request here at any moment. So there'll be a lot of work at the
You
beginning.
can refresh on email.
Yes. And then Matt talked about the external quality assessment. Again, we got generally conforms. They impressively did well over 40 interviews with staff in 3 days. And again, we'll share that out next audit committee. Some of the other audit accomplishments that we've had for the department. We processed or touched 31 different complaints from ethics points. We were part of 17 significant investigations. We supported an additional 3, and two of the complaints spun off into other audits or consultations. We also assisted with a cybersecurity breach report. We'll talk more about that in closed session. And then there was involvement with the strategic plan, both the implementation and continuing to support that. And then Matt is continuing to serve as incident command, as well as a cultural ambassador, and we do sit on the policy and procedure committee.
I'll just say, we're not active in incident command right now, I'm designated to serve.
And then an overview of just kind of follow-up activities and current audits. Still have a number of open recommendations, notably from 2021. A lot of these are from the technology governance or the IS side of things, and I believe Gretchen and her team are still working through those. The other thing I want to highlight is the 70% increase in the number of recommendations that we made this year versus previous years. Just again, kind of highlighting the amount of work that we're picking up and how far we're digging into some of these audits. And next couple of slides just kind of give more of a visual representation of where we're at with recommendations and their status. The next one, this is the positive way to look at this is, yes, there's still a number of recommendations that are open, but if you kind of look at 2024 backwards, they are slowly being worked through and getting closed out. So again, ongoing work. And then visibility, I think we're in our 2nd year where Matt put this before, audit staff of trying to have 8 hours of visibility. So that's getting out in front of, outside of the audit work that we're doing, getting to know or volunteering through other activities within the council, or getting down or sitting down and getting to know other people within the council and what they do and how they do it. Again, putting faces to names, building relationships. It also helps staff gain experience with the council and operations. So there's one thing I believe in the peer review that AFTA had mentioned this as one of the practices that they liked. So most staff did pretty well, some of us are not as well.
Mr. Chair, can you explain what those numbers mean? And what are the different lines?
So the 8 hours is the goal that we're trying to hit for each employee.
So those are employees?
Employees, we took the names out for, yep. And so the 8 hour mark, and then
And then that's over the year?
over the year so far. Some of these numbers will go up. I think we pulled this data earlier in the month, so there's a couple of activities that
Okay,
aren't showing up on there quite
thank
yet.
you.
I'll just note too, that we just started coding time maybe 2 years ago. So some of what Tim talked about with administrative time, I think some of this could reflect just missing things that probably would qualify here. So this is I would say a loose performance metric, but an important one.
Well, I would just say, regardless of it, even if the numbers are off a little bit, you know, the fact that you're talking about it and it's an important objective for you guys, I think that sort of drives the behavior, so that's great.
And the last slide we have is just kind of an overview of the department, not only in terms of the visibility, which we talked about, but also as the experience that the department has, as well as the knowledge that the department has, as well as continuing to gain. So 2 points I want to put here. The 20 hours or 20 CPE hours, that will likely go up to all 10 auditors hitting that goal. Because I know there's a couple activities that people have signed up for that just haven't happened yet. And then regarding certifications, we do have 2 staff members that have at least 1 professional certification. There are 3 additional staff members that are actively pursuing their CIA. All 3 have passed at least 1. I think there's 1 staff member that has passed 2 of the exams. There's also an additional employee that is pursuing their PMP certification next year. So hopefully this time next year that graph will be a little bit more rounded out.
Can you remind me if we have professional development support for staff to attain these learning objectives?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, we do support support the progress towards the exam and training hours. The council is very supportive in terms of training of all types. The leader team specifically will support certification progress.
Any other questions from Tim? All right, thank you, Tim. So now we'll go back to the one business item, risk assessment and audit plan. Matt and Nick.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Nick Jelinek. I'm here to present the annual risk assessment and audit plan. So we'll go over the methodology here, a couple of our top risks, and then we'll get into the audit plan itself. Before we get started here, Tim gave you a little bit of overview on like some of the hours that we spend on this each year, but this is really a team effort, and it's one of those cool times in the department that everybody gets to participate and help shape what we're going to be doing in the next year. So with that, we'll get started here. So generally, we start off with completing the Minnesota Management and Budget Self-Control System Assessment Tool. It covers about 15 areas, and while we're not a cabinet agency, we find it as a helpful tool to kind of help us start structuring some of our conversations. Yes, we've got our risk factors that we look at, but there's these other control areas too, such as like your tone at the top, your budgetary controls, that are important for us to keep in mind as we go throughout our meetings. After we complete the tool, then we start doing our meetings with senior leadership. So this year we did about 20 meetings, or more than 20 meetings this year across the council with different executives from every single division. And we sat down with them, we asked them a bunch of different questions about based on the control self-assessment tool, and then our 6 risk assessment areas, which are financial significance, external and internal risk, IT complexity, equity impact, and the time since we last did an audit of that department, and also on the directional change, if there have been a lot of leadership or other staff changes as well. So once we have those meetings, then we score them based off those factors. We come back, we get together as a group, compare our scoring, and then we start selecting our audit projects, which you will end up seeing in this document here. One thing on the 20 meetings here, so if you'll recall in previous years, that number is closer to 50. This year we tried to do a lot more of that coordination reliance, like we're supposed to be doing under our audit standards. And in this case, we have various contractors here. So like Towson Solutions, Robert Bright's team has completed a risk assessment of our capital project. So you'll hear a little bit more about that later this afternoon, but that gives us some additional coverage. Aon is doing a risk assessment of some of our environmental services pieces. IT Audit Labs has done a risk assessment of our cybersecurity and other technology. And then we also have the coverage through the external audits that Tim spoke about as well. So we consider that all as part as we are trying to develop the risk assessment and audit plan for this year. And then finally, and this came up, we called this out specifically this year because at the request of our peer reviewers, we also consider other industry resources. So for example, the IIA's Risk and Focus. They survey chief audit executives around the globe and in North America, and then they report out what other chief audit executives see as their top risks, such as cybersecurity, digital disruption, human capital. You'll see kind of the similar themes throughout this document, and as we kind of get into the next pieces here. We also consider some of our other governmental and internal statistics, including from like our employment statistics from the Bureau of Labor Bureau, and some of our internal statistics such as from our HR hiring dashboard. So we consider those as part of our risk assessment. And then finally, in our efforts to be not just strategic partners in the council, but we also want to further the council's mission. So we reference and consider the strategic plans of the divisions and the council as well, and other planning documents, for example, Network Next, as we work through our programs. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to CAE Latour for the just to go over the results of the control system assessment.
So I'll just cover this in brief. We've had this report in our risk assessment for a number of years. We did a little bit of a refresh and some repackaging of these top 5 areas. I say loosely top 5. I think they're just 5 significant areas to focus on. And this is kind of that higher level governance, overview, control environment assessment piece. So the first is that tone at the top piece. I think that there are definitely elements, and we've done a lot of culture work in the last year, different messaging from our new regional administrator, different ways of communicating. However, we still see some gaps in terms of the enterprise approach to tone at the top. I'll just cite an example. I had Ian, our intern, work on an analysis of our policies and procedures. And we're finding that we're continuing to lag behind in terms of updating those, making clear, making them well publicized, communicating. Important part of that, the tone at the top, that expectation setting, setting positive expectations. One of the things we found is that like almost half are lacking some information, like either a clear owner, somebody's listed as the owner who doesn't work here anymore, or the titles are wrong. It's just that we're not getting the attention on these policies and procedures that we need to do to make sure we're setting those clear expectations. That's one. Thinking about data governance and security protocols. I just this morning sat in a roundtable of CAEs talking about AI, and AI really starts with data governance and thinking about how we're managing our data. We'll talk a little bit about this in some of our reports today, but understanding where all our databases are, understanding where our data is classifying correctly, et cetera, are for sure for growth. The internal control system, again, we have policies and procedures, so they're a little bit out of date, but to some extent we have them. Really understanding the whys. Bree Henderson is going to be tasked with leading an effort around internal controls this coming year, to get a better handle on and sort of identifying more clearly and documenting those controls. Just putting some more formality around things we already do. Asset management, something we've talked about a lot. Understanding, and sort of having the lists and managing through assets, but then being able to plan and focus on what we're going to have in terms of needs going forward to make sure that, and this has tails in terms of finance. When you get into things like IT equipment, you're talking about cybersecurity and other things, and also financial reporting. And then governance practices. It's part of the RA, the Regional Administration Strategic Plan, to rethink how we're making decisions at the council. And the way that a couple of us are starting to talk about this is really make informed risk-based decisions. They're clear and well communicated. So another area of focus for the control environment. Sure, back to Nick.
Thanks. All right. So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, in the interest of time, I won't cover every single risk that's in here, but I'm going to pick on a couple key risks, I would say. So, first one here is our workforce. Each one of our agency strategic plans, Metro Transit, ES, regional administration, each area has a piece here on the workforce as one of the things that they're going to prioritize here in the next year. So, not shockingly, it came up in our risk assessment as well. So what you'll see on the screen here is some of the key vacancies just for regional administration, information services, and Metro Transit here from the last 2 years. And the reason why I want to highlight these is while we've handled some of our hiring challenges, but we are going to be hiring more here as we expand our systems, as we look to implement Network Next. And the other part here too is that, getting back to Matt's point here on the tone at the top, these are a lot of key decision makers that help drive the culture. And this also then ties into the enterprise-wide culture work that we're doing and the results that came out of that this year. And we're going to be having a check-in coming up on the culture work here, I believe, in January. So, again, a lot of turnover in key positions, but we're making progress in there. A couple other things to mention here. That, like I said, we're still continuing to expand our workforce. HR is taking some steps to address this as well, with some of our unified recruiting plans coming forward here in the next year. The last point on the workforce is that this was a major bargaining year. We had, I think, 10 agreements that needed to be and were settled in the last year. We had some close calls with some of the potential strikes, but while things have worked out, it kind of, as we add more staff, we need to be looking at some of the internal cost allocations to make sure that each division has enough support staff to support our long-term objectives. So that's why you'll see on the audit plan, spoiler, that there's going to be an internal cost allocation audit on there too. Moving on to another top risk, this is one that this committee has been seeing quite frequently over the last year or so, has been our cybersecurity and digital disruption. So just kind of putting those two in the same bucket here. These are one of the IIA's top risks as well. And so, you know, as we introduce more technology and address some of our technical debt, that can also increase our risks. We were going to have the people and processes in place to have to control for these things. Additionally, phishing, other social engineering continues to threaten organizations. The easiest way into an organization are the people. We can do all the systems that we want, but we still need to make sure that we are on guard for phishing attacks. Getting to the disruption here, you know, artificial intelligence, that could play a role going forward. You know, the council, we've got a tech standard on artificial intelligence, but it's also on our audit plan because we want to see what controls we have in place and make sure that we're using artificial intelligence ethically and securely. But the other part too is that we're going to be disrupting our own systems too through the BPSI initiative as well. So as we look to transition some of our legacy systems, we're just going to have to get familiar with some new processes, new technical requirements that we haven't had necessarily in the past. And then last part here, this is spilling over from our workforce conversation, is staffing piece too. This continues while we've had some budget amendments to increase our staffing for our IS staff. You know, we're still having some turnover there. We're still having some competition as well from other agencies. These are highly qualified individuals and obviously very, very high in demand too. So as we go forward, you know, we've taken some steps to address that, whether we're using contracted staff to help support, but it's also a piece of this as we head forward here in the future. Thinking about the general risk environment, you know, it's a lot of the same challenges that we've brought to you before. So yes, it's a new year, but you know, we're still dealing with the effects of climate change. You know, it has an impact on our asset management. You know, as inclement weather occurs, that can have an impact either on our wastewater infrastructure. It can reduce the useful life of our transportation infrastructure. So just kind of keeping those risks in mind, which turns into our asset management conversation. On the government side, we're going to have a new administration in Washington, so that could impact some of our funding sources or some of our regulations that we work with, you know, on a near daily basis. Then at the state level, we are still looking to see what's going to happen with the House of Representatives, but that as of right now is tied. So probably more to come on that. Capital projects, we have large capital budgets, as I'm sure you're all aware, for our Metro Transit and environmental services groups. And so, you know, as we look to open up 3 new lines next year, that introduces more challenges, more workforce challenges, more operations challenges. So, and then finally, I want to touch on community development a little bit on our housing. There's an increased demand for affordable housing, especially as inflationary pressures and other economic pressures impact the metropolitan area, and we have a limited supply. So that continues to be a challenge, but you know, we are working on it. So with that, before I get into the 2025 audit plan, are there any questions? Otherwise, I can keep going and we can save the questions for the end, Mr. Chair. Okay, cool. All right. So Tim went over some of our accomplishments, but some of our other current projects here. So we've got body worn cameras is still going on. We expect to be working on that in the next year. And that's just going to be kind of looking to make sure that we have the controls in place and that we are operating our body cams in accordance with our policies and procedures. IT facility security, you'll be hearing part 1 of this report later today, but we're breaking it into 2 more parts. So we're going to be continuing that work into the new year. MCUB, I believe we're finishing up today, like Tim mentioned. Metro Transit comments and complaints, you'll hopefully be seeing that soon. Same with the Green Line extension change orders. We continue to be monitoring our stock rooms and we've been working with Metro Transit staff and they've made some changes as well, so we'll be continuing to monitor those KPIs as we go forward here. Incident management governance you'll see today, risk management, and I'm gonna skip ahead here to the TMO audit. We have entered in with our clients on this project, so you'll be seeing that hopefully no later than June next year, but we will see how things go. So, then moving on to the 6 to 12 month plan. There's a lot, and we'll kick it to Matt here. Matt, did you want to say anything about this? Otherwise, I can kind of just pick and choose here.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say there's probably more on here than we could possibly get to. There will be some prioritizing. We did talk about with our peer review team. I mean, I've always said we have an ambitious plan. Some of that is with this plan, which is this is the like 6 months from now that we'd start. We like to have some options because depending on what happens in the first 6 months of the year, sometimes there's some choices in terms of what we move forward on. We also probably by the next time we get to this, will pare this back a little bit and also think about whether there's other ways to mitigate risks here. Some of these are issues that are an audit might be useful. There might be other projects that could help mitigate some of these risks too. So I guess with that, there is a lot here, but also recognizing that some of the asterisk assignments are for Towson Solutions, so that we do have additional resources at the table beyond just our audit team.
That's correct, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So just to kind of give you an overview here, pretty much everything up on this list through farebox variance validation was on the audit plan as of last year too. So some of this here is carryover from the previous year, but we have a couple new audits as well. So I mentioned the farebox variance, we had to move that due to time constraints on our part. So we'll be starting that up early next year. I mentioned the internal cost allocation, and the idea for that is to be, while we're very confident in the math behind the things, or behind the calculation, because we have external audit coverage, it's more of a question of if we're still using the correct factors. And it's very important as we expand, as we hire new staff and their demands on their time, make sure that we are properly allocated. Budget forecasting too. This is just kind of to get a sense of how we create our budgets and what things we consider, what controls we have in place. The next one, our investments program, it's actually under council policy and procedure. We are responsible for testing a couple items on there. So we are adding that to the program for the next 6 to 12 months. Up next is the overhead rate reconciliation. Gupton will give you guys a bit of an overview on our role in this process, but there's another side to this too, where council staff are supposed to be looking back at their invoices and making sure that the provisional rate has been addressed and we're actually using the actual rate to make sure that we have either paid the contractor the appropriate amount or received some of those funds back too. So we're going to be taking a look at a couple contracts on that, I believe, as we go into the next new year. Administrative citations, so that's a brand new program that we've gotten a lot of press on. And we just want to, now that it's gotten its feet under it, we want to make sure that we've got the controls in place to make sure that that program is operating efficiently and effectively. SharePoint user administration, so this is going to be more on the accessees, who's got access to what, how are we doling this piece out, and it's going to be kind of more on that IT general control side is the idea. Like Matt mentioned, so the next 5 here are audits coming out of Towson's solutions plan. So we're gonna ask you guys to approve that this piece of the plan as well. Robert Bright is here as well today to give you an overview of some of the work that they did as part of the risk assessment, but we are including this as part of our audit plan for this year. Audits in the next 12th to 18th, so this is going out a little bit further just to kind of keep with our rolling audit plan. So this ES stockroom and budgeting process came out of some of our client meetings this year. And the idea there is to take a look at the budgeting process specifically for the materials management functions of environmental services. So this will be separate from the other stockroom monitoring that we had earlier in the plan, but we have done previous stockroom audits to for environmental services. Artificial intelligence, like I mentioned before, we have a tech standard, but we want to make sure that we're using artificial intelligence at the council ethically and securely. So that's really what the point of that audit is going to be. Crisis intervention protocol, use of force procedures. So this would be for the Metro Transit Police Department. This is just to get a sense of what controls are in place and kind of how we're handling some of those difficult situations. Up next is internal communications. So I know the communications department recently did a self-audit in terms of how we communicate and thinking about our newsletters, The Wire, ES and Metro Transit Insights. And so this audit would continue some of that work and look to identify gaps or redundancies in communication across divisions, and then also how council members and committee members would be receiving information from us as well too. Next one up here, paid family leave and ESST. So this is coming out of the brand new law that went into effect this year. We want to make sure, we want to see how we have implemented the rules surrounding paid family leave and ESST, and make sure that we have the proper controls in place and potentially identify any improvement opportunities. The next piece here is EEO measurements. So kind of thinking about FTA triennial coming up in terms of how we are using how we're reviewing the data that we are reporting out and making sure that we've got the proper controls in place to make sure that this data is accurate. And also in terms of how we want to carry forward our EEO work, how are we using this in terms of a strategic mindset as well. Up next after that is lactation and prayer room accommodations. So we are, this actually came out of some of our other work as we were out visiting facilities for our IT facility. And the idea here is to make sure that our prayer rooms and lactation rooms, that they're compliant with our rules and regulations. Last but not least here for the council team audits, and then the last three are Towson Solutions. Continuity of operations planning. So that gets back to some of our conversations on digital disruption. It gets back to some of our conversations on workforce as well. And we just want to see what processes we have in place, what controls are in place, and how we are planning for when things go wrong. So after that, here's some of the other work that we do. Tim did a great job of covering parts of the extracurricular activities, as I like to refer to them. So we'll continue to do audit follow-up. I know that's been a priority of this committee, so you'll see on the work plan for future years that we're gonna be kind of coming to you guys on a 6-month cycle of reporting out follow-up activities. We continue to be working on ethics and compliance improvement. I believe Matt's gonna have some sort of role in enterprise risk implementation, so we're leaving that on the other projects as well. The next bucket here, external audit coordination, so that's the big one's gonna be FTA training. So we'll continue to help coordinate those audits, continuous improvement. We're always we can't really go to other people if we're not auditing ourselves too. Investigative work, that also takes up a significant amount of our time. And then the last two pieces of interest for you guys as well is the strategic plan update. So our strategic plan goes through 2025, so we will be working on improving that in the upcoming year. And then we've got a couple of audit software that we're looking to implement and improve. So this is going to include an audit project management tool, and then it's also going to include our council's fraud hotline as well, because that contract is coming up here in 26. So the last piece here, this is Towson's plan. So I apologize for the on-screen here, but basically it identifies the 4 projects, green line, blue line, gold line, and then the incinerator for ES. And then there are 7 projects associated with it here, and then on the left and right is basically divided into first half, second half of 2025 and 2026. We also have some identified but unselected projects coming out of this year, and so going forward, you'll be seeing this as part of our annual audit plan and risk assessment, where we include these for you as part of the new global internal audit standards coming out. But we have other projects, but as you see with the 6 to 12 month plan, some of these we either have other audit coverage or we just don't have the time right now to take care of these. And then finally, and I'll go over this briefly, I mentioned at the top that we consider other strategic plans. As a department within regional administration, we wanted to make sure that we were explicitly tying to regional administration's strategic plan. And so there are 3 pillars there: workforce, technology, and governance. And I am happy to say that we were able to connect all of our audits on the plan to at least one of those, and in 2 areas, we had about 20 projects that would fit at least 2 of those items, and 13 projects that would address all 3. So we're looking to be better strategic partners in that sense as well, and so we want to make sure that we're furthering the council's mission, vision, and values as part of our audit work. And with that, I believe we are good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. So, I know we've talked about the body-worn cameras audit. We looked at Metro Transit collects a lot of camera data. So, not just through the police. Do we track any of those systems as well for, all the platforms, all the trains, all the buses have cameras?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, it's a good question. Yes, to some extent. I think that it's, I highlighted in the internal control the data governance piece and really understanding the data that exists, how we're governing it, how we're managing retention. I'm thinking about what I can say here, probably shouldn't say too much, but we are paying attention to the use of the video as well. So yes, it is on our minds and on our radar screens.
All right, another question too. So the farebox variance validation, I'm gonna ask kind of what that really is, because we're about to get all brand new fair equipment in the very, very near term. So I'm just sort of curious, how those 2 things fit together?
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Barber, that's part of the reason why we wanted to move it too. So as we've introduced a lot of new fair equipment, we want to make sure that the fair equipment is reading accurately. And so a lot of this will be kind of taking a look at the controls from bus to counting, and then how we identify errors on the back end as well.
Yeah, if I can follow, I think that's great, especially with the new system coming in, because there are different ways, like we're doing like tap to pay and some of those things that we didn't have before. So it's a significant system upgrade, so it's probably good timing to put the 2 together, it's testing things out in real time.
Yes.
Any other questions from that?
Yeah, thank you, Shirley. So just kind of a general comment about the 12 to 18-month audit plan. I think it'd be helpful to be able to see kind of what, and we could talk about this at a future meeting as well, but what you really expect with the current resources that you think you're going to be able to get through. Another idea might be providing some sort of tiers of, hey, these are the 4 or 5 we really think we gotta get through this year versus these other ones would be good ones if we have the resources, or maybe we'll have to be flexible based upon what's happening. I think it would just help us to know what your priorities are and focus are, and maybe be helpful to signal that to the administration as well. And I know no audit plan's perfect and none of them survive first contact, and there's always adjustments on when you think things are gonna happen. But I've always found it helpful to be able to at least tell the administration, it's like, well, look, this is on the audit plan, we've committed to this one being done. We can delay a few months, but we're going to have to come back. at some point versus some of these things otherwise can just keep getting delayed. Nobody ever wants to be audited. So really just kind of a comment and then something to think about going forward. Based on the resources you have, what do you think you'd be able to do, and is there some ability to prioritize or to signal that this is really what we want to focus on?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, it's an important question. I think this is one that I think about as kind of our next gen, as we go through peer review and respond. And also the implementation of our audit software will help, I think, with this. One of the things we're trying to do better with is estimating. So I look at the list that's in front of us right now, and some of these I can imagine could take us 40 hours, and some are gonna take 400. So trying to figure out what's a low investment, high investment, and I think to your point, just what are some of these risk areas that they need to be addressed one way or another. And I look at AI on this list of, the council and just the whole world needs to start, the velocity of AI is moving very quickly. And we have to have a plan to be ready. So I think thinking about what are these high risk areas that need addressing, whether it's through audit work or something else, I think would be helpful too. So we'll work on that for the next duration here.
I think following up on what Quinn said, Chair Lee, if you're asking me to approve this plan, I'm not. It looks like a list of opportunities, and that I'm sure exist. I wonder if some of it is even what I would call audit worthy. Some of it feels like process improvement. Some of it feels like you should be at the table when the organization is discussing AI, for example, but is it really ready for an audit? Not sure what your criteria would be. So it feels like within this, these listings, there's ways to kind of segregate it out and kind of identify the things that are really going to be audits versus where your involvement would add a lot of value. So that's one piece of feedback in terms of maybe how to refine this. It's an overwhelming list, I can tell you. So I just feel like there's some, and then understanding, how will you prioritize? If you could bucket it, and separate the audit from the really kind of consulting work would be one way. And then within the audit bucket, I'm assuming you'd use some kind of risk-based approach to say, of the remaining however many here, from a risk perspective, these are the ones that, we're gonna make our top priority. So that would be kind of another way to refine the list. And then just a final comment, again, everyone struggles with this. I'm not, from this document, I'm not really sure how I relate all the really good work that you did with the risk assessment to how it translates into these projects. So I'm not really seeing that connection. And then I wonder what your ERM folks are they gonna, is the plan for them to do the risk assessment at some point rather than you guys doing it, or kind of what's the intersection between, kind of those two disciplines in the future. So that was a lot, but that was my feedback. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thanks, Nick. I think we'll go back and take the ground.
But we do have to get an approval for the plan.
Oh, that's right.
As part of the standard. So, and I'll just say, there's really a lot of good feedback, and I think ways to improve. I think we're constantly trying to tinker with how we do this to make it clearer, and I think it's grown in part because we have a lot of risks to deal with. But I take your point that, and especially the new standards, shifting from consulting to advisory, it's a different terminology, but there are, I think, windows of, I think you're right in the sense that there are places here, and we have in the past, just with big consulting, we're at the table in a lot of places without necessarily formalizing an audit report. So I think we can clarify that, especially in some of these items. So we'll work on that for the next iteration. But we'll ask for approval of the plan so we can go forward with the focus for the next 6 months especially, so.
All right, thanks, Nick. Can I get a move of approval for risk assessment audit plan 2025?
I move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Alright, that passes. Thank you. And now we go back down to reports. Number 2, environmental services, incident management governance.
Good afternoon, Chair Lee. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Stephen Yame, and I'm here today with my colleagues Brenna Batchfield and Amy Gillespie to present the ES Incident Management and Governance Audit. Just a little background to what ES does. This audit is situated with the Environmental Services Division of the Council, and they have primary responsibility for processing wastewater in the 7-county metro. They process approximately 250 million gallons a day through their 9 treatment plants dotted across the metro. They also monitor air and water quality, and then they respond to spills, odor, and other environmental threats, all in a bid to protect public health and the environment. They do this also bearing in mind the incidents in and around their catchment areas. And they have a system which is called Spills, Odors, and Safety System that tracks both incidents and near misses in and around their catchment areas. It is internally known as the SOS system. So if you hear about it, this is what it is. Whilst engaged in executing their mandate, they do have reporting and compliance requirements that they perform to institutions like the MINOSHA, which is MN, Occupational Health and Safety Administration, and also to Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Prior to performing this audit, we did investigate the data that was given to us. We did dig deeper into the data that we got. The scope for the audit was from 1st January 2022 through to December 31, 2023. And we found some interesting trends that I want to share with you, 3 of them actually. We noted from the data that incident reports are highest during the summer and the winter months. And the second one was that odor and spill incidents are more likely to occur during the summertime. And something that we are not too proud about, not so good news, is that safety incidents appear to be steady all year round. With this in mind, we set out to achieve 3 main objectives for this audit. The first was to identify and improve communication and clarity of rules for incident management governance. Second was to assess the record keeping and reporting for compliance with MINOSHA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and other state statute requirements that we are to abide by. The third was to evaluate the alignment of the current incident response and analysis processes with what we consider the gold standard in occupational health and safety. Mr. Chairman, committee members, whilst we went through these processes, these testing, we also did a lot of testing that resulted in non-findings. But for the lack of time, we will now concentrate on the observations that present opportunities for improvement to the ES leadership. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Amy Gillespie, to start with the first finding. We will give you the opportunity to ask questions after the presentation.
Awesome, thanks, Stephen. Chair Lee, members of the committee, our first finding reads, incident causal factor data is not standardized or complete. So the original purpose of this testing was to determine common causal factors among safety incidents that were reported to the SOS system. However, when we received that data from SOS, we quickly found that we were not going to be able to complete that testing as originally planned. The data that we received wasn't standardized, the data was often incomplete, or the data that was entered did not appropriately address the data field for which it was entered. Because of this unreliable data quality, we weren't able to draw any meaningful conclusions about common causal factors. We determined 2 causes for this. The first is that data fields in SOS were not defined, An example of this that you might have seen in the report, there was a data field for training received by employees. We found a variety of information entered for that data field, council training, job titles like electrician, plumber, and we had one where the undergrad institution was entered, so not quite pertinent to training, or not the same types of training. The second was that information put into SOS is not controlled by any kind of skip logic or drop-down menus. So users are just able to enter really any type of information. The risk of this is that without reliable data, we miss opportunities to learn from and potentially prevent future incidents. Okay, and I'll hand it to Brenna to talk about the next two findings.
Thanks, Amy. Our second finding is that relatively few incidents went through the taproot root cause analysis process. So SOS is the system where incidents are reported, and then taproot is a method of root cause analysis that's used within environmental services. And this figure that you see on the right of the slide is one of the incident severity matrices. This is for safety. It's also available as an appendix towards the back of the report. Essentially, this is some guidance that was created internally, but these matrices have not been formally adopted and are not used by all departments within environmental services to the same extent. In here, these matrices outline guidance on, okay, if these scenarios exist, then the criteria is critical and it should go through taproot and taproot should be completed within 30 days. Or no, this was minor, taproot's not required, other instances like that. And when we were testing this, we pulled a sample of incidents, compared them against the matrix, and then used that to determine how many should have gone through the taproot process. The recommendation we have here relates to expanding the different options of some sort of criteria that can be used to triage and prioritize incidents through taproot as well as through some of the other root cause analysis processes that we heard. Per OSHA, all incidents should go through some sort of root cause analysis process, but that process doesn't need to be the same for all incidents. And ES has a variety of tools in use. It's just that it's not necessarily standardized when one or the other should be used. And then our final finding relates to action items. So just like audits come up with recommendations, incidents have action items attached to them. And this figure here is what we use as criteria. This is the NIOSH hierarchy of controls, which is used in occupational health and safety. And in here, action items where you eliminate a hazard, substitute it for a safer alternative, or use some sort of engineering to separate people from the hazard. Those are considered higher level controls, and they may take more time to implement, and in some cases they have capital costs or other barriers to get installed, but they tend to be more permanent and more effective. When looking at action items, both for incidents that went through the taproot process as well as incidents that did not go through the taproot process, most of the action items that we saw were administrative or more possibly looking at training, adding an alarm, speaking with people, reminding them to be careful, that sort of thing. Cause that we heard for this is that obviously when you have an incident, you want to do something quickly so that you don't have people continuing to get hurt, and you don't have chemicals continuing to get into the environment. So our recommendation here is to improve documentation and research into some of these higher level controls. Even if they can't be implemented immediately for whatever reason, we'd like to see some more documentation showing that they were discussed, and it's possible that that could help support an argument for, in the future, needing to approve funding for something stronger. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Any questions for the presenter? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Chair Lee, is this area subject to external audits that would potentially find some of these same concerns?
Mr. Chairman, committee member Andra, there are certain audits that come with this portfolio, especially the OSHA principle. So OSHA requires the council or the division to, as an example, exhibit their logs, where incidents are recorded. And then, and so at some point in time, they could be subject to these external audits, which could result in some form of reputational impact.
Chair Lee, Committee Member Roethler. I would also add that for some incidents, there's other types of reporting that an external entity might pick up on. So for instance, if there's a spill, certain substances need to be reported to the state duty officer who would then take over and follow up on the spill. But the processes that we looked at were internal processes, and at least to my knowledge, that's not something that external reviewers look at in detail.
So we don't necessarily have a compliance issue here as far as you
Correct.
or something that could result in financial penalties or anything like that.
Correct. This is more process improvement rather than a compliance issue.
So if, my question is, if filling out incident reports there's issues with human error, do we have good cameras in our facilities so that if something horrible happens and for legal reasons we need to corroborate exactly what happened, that barring lack of an incident report, we could really know?
I would say one limitation of this audit is that we weren't able to do on-site visits to any of the plants. I know from, I'm sure my colleagues can speak to this, to other on-sites we've done, we have seen cameras, but I can't say for sure for this one.
Yeah. I know from other audit work that there are video cameras inside the facilities. I know we referenced them during the audiovisual services contract audit that we reviewed. And then also through some other audit work, I know that footage can be requested in some situations, such as for a work comp claim. But in terms of looking at details of how we're confirming these incidents, that was out of scope.
Any other questions?
So Chairman, I just wanted to add to what my colleagues have just mentioned, that as part of the SOS system, and when an incident occurs and it's reported, I think there are a number of follow-ups that are done to, first of all, to ascertain whether the incident actually occurred and whether there's a fault that needs to be quickly remediated. And so there are other processes that appear to confirm and to validate whether that process actually occurred. So I think these speak to the fact that there are other processes that will go around the whole remediation process to confirm it.
Thank you, Amy and Stephen and Brendan. I think our next item is Metropolitan Council for usually business permit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, let's see here. Chair Lee, members of the committee, I already introduced myself, but my name is Amy Gillespie. I'm here with my colleagues Tim Larson and Ian Klein, and we are here to present the findings from our MCUB audit, Metropolitan Council Underutilized Business Program. I can take your clicker so they can. Thank you. All right, so a bit of background about this audit and about the MCUB program. The MCUB program is designed to promote business opportunities for disadvantaged business owners, such as women, veterans, and other groups. The program is administered by the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, or OEEO. They work with divisions to create division-specific benchmarks and as well to create project-specific goals. The program is required by Minnesota statute. Within the MCUB program, there are 3 smaller processes or programs aimed at promoting MCUB vendors for smaller dollar value projects. Those are MCUB Select, MCUB Direct, and MCUB Preference. And this table represents a breakdown of MCUP spending by quarter for the scope of our audit. So beginning with Q1 2022 all the way through Q4 2023, you'll see that the spending is broken down by construction projects and then goods and services. It shows the dollar amount that was eligible for MCUP funding versus the percent that was actually spent. So within the scope of the audit, construction projects spent over around 8 million, and then for goods and services, about 29 million was spent. So the scope of the audit, we examined MCUP vendor reviews, the MCUP list, goals, MCUP-related policies and procedures, as well as MCUP activities for a sample of projects that included MCUP vendors and procurements from 2022 to 2023. There was a concurrent evaluation being done with OEEO, therefore we excluded the objectives covered by that external consultant because they were reviewing barriers to vendors accessing the MCUP program. Our audit focused specifically on compliance and internal business process. So we had 3 objectives for this audit. The first one was to ensure that the council has an accurate MCUP vendor list and that that list is updated regularly. The second one is to verify that overall council-wide MCUP goals and goals for procurements are consistently developed by OEEO staff. And then finally, to ensure that pre- and post-award activities are related to MCUP vendors are performed according to policy 5-1 and its subsequent procedures. So we conducted testing that did not result in formal findings. We listed these as non-finding observations. The first is that pre- and post-award activities are conducted effectively. So these include review of good faith efforts, invoice reviews, on-site visits. All of those were conducted appropriately for the contracts we reviewed. Additionally, MCUP payments are updated to match contract change orders. So in the event of a change order, the contracts that we reviewed did update their MCUP goals appropriately. And I'll hand it to Ian to cover our first finding.
So as previously stated, one of our objectives was to ensure that the council keeps an updated MCUP vendor list. And so our testing reviewed the MCUP vendor list and compared the vendor list to the 4 certification lists that a vendor must maintain status on in order to be eligible for the MCUP program. Those lists are maintained by the Minnesota Department of Administration, the City of St. Paul, and the Minnesota Unified Certification Program. And so we reviewed 1,766 vendors that were on the MCUP vendor list and compared it to those 4 lists to ensure that each vendor could be found on at least one of those 4 lists. And the testing resulted in finding that 57 of those vendors were not found on one of those 4 lists. That represents about 3% of the vendor list that we reviewed. So this poses 2 risks to the council. The first is that there could be a loss of business to certified MCUP vendors to vendors that are actually non-certified. And then there are risks that the reputation of the MCUP program could be damaged just due to inaccuracies on the list. It should be noted that OEEO maintains the list through a manual process and they update that list every 2 weeks. I will pass it over to Tim Larson to speak to our next finding.
So last one has to do with some documentation issues that we noted as we were progressing through the audit. So they had a worksheet that they used to calculate the goal. OEO uses to calculate the goal, the MCUP goal. We sampled 10 of the 9. They all had an explanation. There's plenty of detail of, if we're going to adjust a goal up or down, what the reason was for that, except for one where we adjusted it from 0.67 to 3%. And then there's a spot on the worksheet for signature and date by the director. None of those were filled out or assigned. And then there were some discrepancies with the MCUP programs, what's posted, the information that's posted on our our council website and what was noted in the policy and procedure. There's a couple of programs that were referenced in policy and procedure, and there were discrepancies in a couple of thresholds, again, between the website and what we had in policy and procedure. So the risk being, potential loss of MCUP opportunities and loss of institutional knowledge. We're not having accurate documentation. Before I open up to questions, I do want to thank OEO for their help and their feedback through this. It was a little bit of a process for us to get through. And I believe Isla was supposed to present to the management committee the small business equity audit information, but time ran out. But hopefully what we have in conjunction with what the external assessor has, we'll build a little bit more of a robust MCUP program, and hopefully it will be used a little bit more widespread across council, so.
Questions for the presenter?
A quick question you might not be able to answer, maybe I'll talk to Shanti afterwards, but is there a way to automate some of the, just the list? Because there are, you know, the point of the MCUP program is to be certified in different things and it feeds into that, like, so it's supposed to make things easier, but yeah, cross-checking how many things per week doesn't make sense.
Chair Lee, Councilmember Barber. So yes, that is one thing I talked with Megan. They are looking to automate this. This was on their list before we even got to it.
I'm not surprised.
So they are well aware of it and they're working through it. It may take a little bit of time just given the resources of IS and IT, so.
Alright, thanks.
Any other questions? So my question is, so last week at management, there was an item on sole source, and Councilmember Gail Cedarberg asked the question if our sole source process had income requirements, and if not, then why not? And I don't know how much of a tangent that is from a policy perspective, if that's something, the question that will have to be worked up through us or for management or Matt, I don't know. What do you think?
Chair Lee, I don't have an answer to that question off the top of my head.
I could probably.
Oh,
Yeah, I would probably.
Good.
Okay, so a lot of times for our sole source contracts, it's typically, like we talked about the FAIR system that's coming in place. So an MCUB or DBE is often assigned to a subcontractor. There's no subcontractor for somebody providing equipment and big things like that. Or even some of our big bus contracts, like may go out to contracted service providers that may have a very diverse workforce, but they're not subcontracting, so it doesn't, so then there's not a goal assigned to it. It's not that, you know, there still may be a MCUB or EVE business that gets that contract, but it's not something that they do. Very close.
I would just say that not all sole source contracts are the same. But what I would say is that OEEO does not review sole source contracts or subcontracting opportunities. So I would hesitate to go beyond that on any specific sole source agreement.
Thank you, Shanti. Any other questions for the presenter? Thank you. The next item under reports is the final reports, the North Star Safety Review.
Mr. Chairperson, committee members, again, my name is Stephen Nami and I'm here to present the North Star Real Audit. So the North Star Real Audit is just a safety compliance audit that happens every year per the governing CFR, which is 49 CFR 225.33. And this mandates the operating agency, in this case Metro Transit, to have an internal control plan that seeks to report incidents on the rail, employee incidents, passenger incidents, as well as real accidents accurately and completely to the Federal Rail Administration. For the North Star, a little background to the North Star, it runs from Big Lake all the way through to Minneapolis, and it's about 40 miles. And last month, they turned 15 years, so it's been a long journey. The requirements of the audit are to ensure that Metro Transit, as operators of the North Star trains, have an internal control plan which is in conformity with the governing CFR. And part of our job was to ensure that if any changes happen with the CFR, it is reflected in the internal control plan. And then further on, to verify that commuter or employee injuries are reported promptly, correctly, and accurately. This next one is also to ensure that if there are any real accidents, those are also reported correctly. The results of our audit, Mr. Chairman, committee members, I'm happy to report that there were no changes to the internal control plan, and there were also no changes to the CFR, the governing CFR. And all injuries and accidents that we found were also reported correctly and promptly to the FRA, which is the Federal Revenue Administration. There were no findings for this audit. And at this point, I'll open it up, Mr. Chairman, committee members, to any questions.
Any questions for Steve? Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we go to our information items, and the first one is the risk assessment capital projects.
You wanna do a quick intro?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So this information, we've already talked about the audit plan going forward. This is, Telson and Robert and his team put together the risk assessment document, included a couple of recommendations. They're sort of higher level observations, I think are useful for us in thinking about our capital program. So he's gonna talk about that. We just processed this in the last week or so we haven't gotten full management responses back, so that's kind of why we're at information item here. But we will be thinking about these as we go forward, and tracking kind of through our follow-up process. And work with Telson. So with that, I'll turn it over to Robert to talk through.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. As Matt has pointed out, we wish to present our preliminary review of the governance review and risk assessment. As you noted, within the approved risk assessment plan, there was many capital projects listed, the blue line, the gold line, green line. Those projects are a result of this review that we conducted over this year, this past year. So I control this, huh? Okay, great. All right, just to speak on the engagement objectives. We conducted a limited review, governance review and risk assessment, and really the control environment surrounding the capital improvement program, recognizing you have three divisions: community development, transit, as well as environmental services. Most of our work focused on transit and environmental services. Really looking at governance policy against industry best practice, looking at how risk assessment policies are reporting for all Met Council capital projects. And then we drill down a bit to look at what is currently in place for risk assessment on ongoing projects. As mentioned, kind of specifically throughout the presentation, you will hear about the green line, gold line, environmental services, the fourth incinerator. And we did take a look at other BRT, kind of ABRT type projects, kind of for this assessment. A quick summary before getting into the details is that we did review select policies and procedures, in which we do have quite a bit, and really wanted to focus on some of the best practices for cost reporting, as we do have one observation in relating to that for the overall council. We did conduct interview meetings with Met Councils, I would say, since February of 20, our first introduction of committee members, as well as project teams back in February 24. From these meetings, where we looked at the risk assessment as noted, we noted, evaluated select capital projects that were listed in the unified budget, primarily for transit and environmental services divisions. And we created risk categories and evaluation thresholds in order to assess select projects. Some of the risk categories could be kind of just size of project. Your green line, quite naturally, the size of the project. Kind of gold line BRT, you're about to complete the project, is it fully complete? The type of delivery, you're going, new design build with the environmental services, that's new to them. That presents a risk for that substantial project. And we did kind of extensive document review and then some kind of select project site walks. We did spend some time, at the kind of where the new environmental services incinerator will be installed, as well as walked kind of portion of the green line. Just summary details prior to getting into the 5 observations that we will present is that there is no uniform policies and procedures for governance or project management as a whole. Your project management for your mega projects, the green line, blue line, a lot of them are dictated by the FTA, some of the requirements and so forth. But in general, not all your projects require such routine project management controls. You kind of know the council has a set of policies and procedures saying this is how we're going to follow that. Not saying projects are all out of control, they're not being managed, but from a best practice organization standpoint, I've known we've seen organizations have a defined set of project management processes for measuring progress, change management, so on and so forth. But as mentioned, your federally funding projects are adhering to your FTA policies for risk assessment, project management plans. We did review those, and those are in kind of compliance. Workforce concerns. I know early in the presentation you heard about workforce concerns, just general administration and transit, and that continues to be an observation as we discussed with the Green Line kind of team, the operations. They are concerned. You will have revenue service day end of 27, beginning of 28, but there's concern of whether or not you have the right kind of personnel to support that. And as noted, there was 5 observations mentioned. First observations had to do with project management policies and controls. And as mentioned, there is no defined set of policies for overall governance of project management controls. However, for the federally funded projects, you do have those policies and procedures in place, and there is compliance. So the recommendation, quite naturally, is to undertake a review of what it would take to get to that, development of a standard set of policies and procedures for all your capital projects. Take some of the lessons learned from, you have a lot of expertise here, you have many years, you spending money, you're doing a lot of things, but how can you capture that in a good set of policies and procedures as you move forward? And as noted, Matt mentioned that there is, the findings, observations have been presented to management. We're waiting on kind of response in order to determine a kind of potential completion date. The second observation is reporting of capital authorized, status reporting of authorized capital program. And this is really, you have an approved budget, the authorized capital program, but it's really the reporting of actual commitments and expenditures against that budget throughout the year and reporting to council. I think there's an approval of the total capital project, but there's not the reporting of how we're performing against that capital project in terms of commitment, new contracts awarded, as well as our contracts being updated with changes, as well as the expenditures against that to the full council member. Some of that is being done by the various groups. The transit group, they're required to report monthly and quarterly as part of the requirement for the FTA. But what we're saying is that information is really not brought forward to the full council on a periodic basis, just the approved budget. And we would see that as a best practice, whether or not you do it quarterly, every 6 months, but how are you doing according to the plan for the overall, kind of to the full council, not just to a silo, potential silo group, excuse my French, silo for transit and so forth, but it's something we recommend. And the report may not have to be in full for all capital projects, maybe an establishment of a minimum thresholds for those that may approve, whether it's 5 million or 25 million, but something going to the full council for all projects above a certain limit, and how you're doing according to budget, not just the budget number, but also the expenditures and commitments. The risk assessment policy, and in looking at governance, there is no pure risk assessment policy that's mandated for all projects, but there is a kind of policy in place, for federal projects that are federally funded. Really, we're focusing on what is the risk assessment policy for council in general. Council has a risk, Transit Ways has a risk assessment policy, RF17, Transit Way Advancement Policy, but if I look at environmental services or other projects, there is no policy to cover, the entire program for capital project. So quite naturally, the recommendation is develop a model, set some criteria that all projects, once again, all projects under 5 or 20 million, whatever, but let's have a starter process of developing a risk assessment policy, and this could be part of your overall program management, project control, project management policies, kind of we mentioned early on. Operational readiness is our observation number 4, and this is really has to do with the integration of going from construction to pre-revenue to revenue service. Doing interviews and mentioned with, with the Green Line, there is concern about operational readiness. Right now, one of our audits we're looking at doing is the Green Line is the system integration. It's okay to complete the construction, but unless you have a proper system integration and interface with operations handover, you're not gonna meet your pre-revenue date. The concern here was staffing to do this, as well as, pretty much the contractor system, JV contract, which is separate from, construction, civil type contract there. The recommendation, continue to monitor the workforce, understand the plan to get the right personnel in place and the right transfer of responsibilities from construction over to operations for the proper integration of your planned revenue service date. Observation 9 has to do with lessons learned. I'm sure there's quite a bit of lessons learned within council on the major capital projects. We see in some organizations they're not properly captured. We see people don't want to tell their lessons learned because of other exposure, legal, whatever, but we believe a good lessons learned policy should be in place in order to take the knowledge. Why not? I mean, this is something that, you purchase the lessons learned, let's use them going forward. So we recommend having developing a more formal lessons learned policy, and this could be part of the governance policy that we mentioned early on going forward. I know the blue line is taking some lessons learned from the green line, but it should be more formal type policy there. Just a summary of we call enhancing the process, create standard guidelines for governance and project management, enhance financial status reporting of the CIP, once again expenditure commitments, the risk assessment model template across all CIP, operational readiness as mentioned, and then development of the lessons learned policy for use in all capital projects. Questions? Hopefully I've answered, and I wish to thank Matt and his team and all project team members and committee members, for support and guidance and on this effort. I'm looking forward to performing the forward audits that have been approved there.
All right, thanks. Any questions for Mr. Britt? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you. These 5 recommendations really give me a lot of hope. And I particularly like what you were suggesting regarding the lessons learned. As a former school teacher, if we don't remember the lessons we learned or should have learned, we're in trouble. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similarly, I think that when you look at even just the switch from the green line to the blue line, we now have a transit-weighted advancement policy. We now have some different risk lenses that we're putting into place. And even how we've structured how the project offices and the boards that are associated with it have substantially changed, but it's probably not captured anywhere. So it's probably really smart for us to sit down and do that. So we're definitely applying those lessons learned, but it's Alice, I'm a big believer to take credit for the work you do, so we should probably do that.
And you have a lot of smart people working on projects, why not capture it?
Any other questions, comments?
Shirley, just a comment. So I would argue that the 4, all 5 recommendations kind of work together. I mean, they're all sort of ways in which you do project management well, I think. So I think this is a great report, and I hope your management response is a really positive one.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I just wanna echo my colleague, Suvento. This is why we bring in third-party experts like your firm, so thanks for your.
Thank you.
Next we have the audit committee work.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm gonna be really brief because we're kind of pressed for time. In your packet, there is a updated schedule for the audit committee. As I mentioned, 6 months ago, we brought this just so you as committee members and even some senior management will have a sense of what's coming on the audit plan going forward. I'll just highlight a few things that are significant. So we're sliding our first meeting of the year to March. It's a little better timing for us because of the way the holidays work. It's just getting work done is just better if we have a little more time after that window. And significantly, we're gonna be bringing the charters policy. The plan is to do that anyway at that March meeting. So like that, and we'll have some drafts and things for you to look at before that happens. And also, I'll just note that we've even put in the March 2026 to charters again to kind of respond to the peer review. So thinking about that. Otherwise, I just, I think it's important just to have this laid out a little bit, and that's really the intent. So feel free, offline or even right now, just if there's comments or things you'd like to see, adjustments to be made. Obviously, we'll update the staff audits as we go, and some of the other things will fall into place in terms of OLA and things like that. So with that, I guess I'll just turn it over for questions.
Any questions, comments from Matt? Thanks, Matt. Our next information item is the overhead approval process. We have group one. Awesome. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Guptan Kaplinghat, and in today's presentation, we'll give you an overview of the overhead rate process and some of the key elements of our approval and review process, and also we'll talk a little bit about our upcoming training program that is in regards to the review and approval process. What are overhead rates? So overhead rates are a critical part of our council contracts, especially those with architectural and engineering firms. Overhead expenses are those expenses that are operational expenses that are not tied to a specific project, but they are still essential to run a business. E&F firms apply their overhead rates to their direct costs to allocate some of their shared expenses to a specific project. So some of the examples of overhead expenses are office rents, utilities, and indirect labor such as administrative salaries. The role of audit in this process is to assess our calculations and also to ensure that the rates are in compliance with federal and state guidelines. And moving on to some of the key elements of the review and approval process. How do we receive these review requests? Firms usually submit their overhead rates as part of their cost proposals. On those contracts that are multi-year, we usually review and approve these rates on a yearly basis. Once these overhead rates are actually approved, they are entered into our database. This is a database that's managed by our department. Some of the information that actually goes into this entry is the name of the firm, the contact information, their address, and rates going at least 5 years, if not more. Council staff may request read-only access based on their business need. And on the right-hand side, you will see the amount of hours spent on a monthly basis from January through February. The 320 hours also includes a little under 20% of those hours are spent on process improvement and also the upcoming training program. So the training program that we're developing and designing right now includes some of these topics. This includes understanding the review services provided by us and also how to actually request a review and also all the documents that needs to be part of that request. We'll also talk a little bit about, as part of the training program, we'll talk a little bit about how to navigate the overhead rate database. This training will be available for council staff by the end of Q1 of 2025. Before I take any questions, I also want to acknowledge Tammy and Sydney Closter, who's also an important part of this process. So with that, I will take any questions.
Real briefly, thank you, Shirley. So can you explain to me, or could you clarify why Audit's developing the training? Am I missing stuff there?
Chair and committee member, this process of review and approval stays within our purview, within Audit's purview. So we approve, and so as part of the training, we'll be giving on how to actually, so for example, the request is actually made by either procurement or project managers. So we give them, the training will include on how to actually send a request to us, all the documents that they need to collect. So that's one of the reasons why we're actually developing the training. Because the process remains within the audit.
Okay, so Audit actually owns the process.
Absolutely.
Okay. Not for setting the rates though.
Not for setting the rates, only reviewing and approving the rates. The rates are set and calculated by the individual firms.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so do you have the phone?
No.
Any other questions or comments for the team? Right, thank you.
Next one. Next one.
Okay. Our next, well, Matt mentioned this earlier, our next scheduled audit committee meeting date is March 18th, 2025.
Mr. Chair, I move this meeting be closed to the public pursuant to Minnesota statutes, section 13D.05, subdivision 3D, so the committee can discuss data classified as not public.
I think, committee member Lento, can I get a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay, all in approval say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The committee by majority vote in a public meeting decide to hold a closed meeting to review confidential or non-public information. Discussions at the closed portion of this committee meeting must be limited to discussions. No other public businesses may be discussed or transacted during the closed portion of the meeting.
Just mention what the two topics are.
Oh yeah, so we're going to close session, and our two topics are information technology, facility security, and housing and redevelopment authority business process improvements. And after the closed portion of the meeting concludes, the committee member should not move to open the meeting to the public. To conclude the meeting, a committee member should move to adjourn the meeting. So we will not be coming back into regular session at the end of this closed session.
Mr. Chair, we also won't let anybody out of the room until they take some more cookies.
Thanks for the cookies. The meeting's adjourned.